Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever. Whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Are you one of the thousands of federal workers who is now unemployed because of DOGE? Do you have Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security and concerned about what will happen if the Trump administration follows through on slashing budgets? Does it matter to you that Elon Musk has access to your Social Security and IRS records? Are you disappointed that grocery prices are still high and so is inflation? Are you wondering, where is Congress? We'll ask Congressman Bobby Scott that very question when Another View returns right after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. It is so good to be back with you live. First, it was a snowstorm, and then I got hit with a triple whammy. COVID, flu B, and a sinus infection, all at the same time. It was rough. But I'm much better now, and I'm back to masking because respiratory illnesses are running rampant. So please, everybody, take care of yourself. There are so many things happening in Washington that it's hard to know where to start. We're happy to have with us today United States Congressman Robert C. Bobby Scott. He represents Virginia's 3rd Congressional District and has done so since 1993. And he also serves as the ranking member of the Committee on Education and Labor. Welcome, Congressman Scott. How you doing?
Thank you, Barbara. It's good to be back.
So you are in D.C., right, and working hard for the people. But I got to take you back to Tuesday night because I know that you attended the address to the joint session of Congress. Can you describe what the mood felt like internally? I know what we saw on TV, but how were you? What was going on inside the chamber?
Well, it was a little surrealistic because the president kept saying stuff that was unrelated to the truth. He said that, for example, that he had accomplished more in 6 weeks than many presidents had done in 8 years. One thing that was conspicuously absent from that statement was anything that he'd actually accomplished. I mean, there have been great fanfare, chaos, and confusion. But in terms of actually accomplishing anything, the only thing he's actually accomplished is increasing the cost of eggs. So, listening to a sling of pronouncements was just interesting to watch. One part I liked is when he declared his support for a balanced budget. He got a standing ovation on the Republican side. He didn't mention the fact that the Republicans had just reported a budget that increases the annual deficit, and the president endorsed that budget. So, I mean, with all the problems in the budget, the idea that the fact is it makes it's worse than if they'd just gone home and done nothing in terms of balancing the budget. But he just proclaims support, gets a standing ovation, as if talking about balancing the budget will actually help balance the budget.
So it was clear that, on the Democrat side, because everyone was seated, and that some people were visibly disturbed about the speech. Some got up and walked out. Others held up signs. What I'm wondering is, what is the conversation right now going on among Democrats in Washington? What are you guys talking about in terms of all of these changes and how to deal with them?
Well, the changes are in the executive branch, not the legislative branch, and many of them are without any legal authority, and the courts have dealt with that. Congress could help deal with that by asking and getting answers to questions, but the majority won't insist on answers. When a minority of the minority party asks a question, the president tends to frankly just ignore the questions. If the majority would join us in asking the questions, there's an implicit threat that we could actually subpoena people to come and testify. Mm-hmm. But if the majority shows no interest at all in getting answers to questions, it's very difficult. We've asked questions about Elon Musk, for example. What is he doing in the computer systems? As you mentioned, I serve as ranking member on the Committee on Education and the Workforce. Mm-hmm. What's he doing? What's he doing on the in the computer system in the Department of Labor? What does he need to be there for? I mean, he's got access to sensitive information, all of the healthcare information on claims and things like that, people's personal information. But he's also got. Does he have access to job numbers before they become public? Does he have access to? I mean, he's under his companies are under investigation by OSHA and the NLRB. Does he have access to the investigation files so we can find out maybe who the confidential witnesses are? I mean, why does he need? I don't know if he has access to that or not. He's in the computer system, and we've asked. We haven't gotten answers. Part of all of this chaos and confusion. Obviously, a lot of federal employees are just randomly being fired. Yeah. So it's just bizarre, this probationary employee category where people who are probationary, apparently short-term in their position, is just a bizarre thing. At the VA hospital, there's some positions that have been hard to fill. They finally get somebody to fill it, and all of a sudden it's a probationary employee, and they're gone. What do you got to start all over again? You've got people who are promoted, who've done so well they've been promoted, and they're in their new position. They're technically a probationary employee, and they're being fired after years in service in an agency. They get a promotion, and then because they're recently in their new position, they're getting fired.
Is that what happened with
causing a lot of chaos and confusion?
Yeah. So you brought Alexandra Hunt, who is a retired Army veteran, who was working at the Hampton VA, and she got swept up in the DOJ downsizing. Is that what happened to her? Was she new in that position, or
no? Nobody knows what's happening. They just come in and just start firing people, and the fact is that. These guys who are coming in just firing people willy-nilly cannot know what they're doing. They can't know what they're doing in a VA hospital or an air traffic control tower or at NASA or a nuclear weapons area where they just start firing people. They don't know who's needed and who isn't needed. They just start firing people. And one of the things that people forget is that the civil service is not a jobs program. It's a service program. When you have a federal employee, they're there to do something. And when they're fired, they're no longer doing what they were doing. And Alex was very much involved with patients. She was there. She got to know the patients, and all of a sudden she's gone. The relationships that they had established, and a lot of these are people with PTSD and other problems where they like to get to know the employees and form that relationship where they develop a comfort level. All of a sudden, a lot of them are gone. But she was invited to Washington as an example of someone who's just notified you're fired. I mean. You know, you don't treat people that way. If you expect people to do their jobs, you don't expect them to be walking around on eggshells, not knowing from one day to the next whether they're going to have a job. It's kind of hard to get the job done when you have people like that. I question whether or not after these Doge people fired the FAA director and then went and sent or forced them to resign or whatever, and then essentially sent that fork in the road notice to everybody in the air traffic control tower. Why was anybody surprised that there was an airline crash for the first time in over a decade, when people must have been distracted because of all of this confusion that's going on? But you're talking about the speech the other night when they said that accomplished in all of this. I don't know that they've accomplished anything. They certainly haven't saved any meaningful amount of money. They have published reports that they saved a lot of money, but when you look at the reports and look at the numbers, you'll find that some of the numbers are double counted, triple counted, some quadruple counted, where they have many people with access to the same amount of money on a contract, and they count each person as saving the full amount of the contract. Well, you've just counted that money 4 times.
Gotcha. I understand.
And so the calculated savings is no more than about 10% of what they claim, and a lot of it they're saving no money at all. The confusion in some of the agencies, they're kicking people out of their leases. The National Labor Relations Board office in Buffalo, where they've been trying to have organizing efforts, union organizing efforts in that area, they just canceled the lease. I don't know where the people expect to go to work the next day. The administration says everybody has to come back to work. People, they are canceling leases with very little notice all over the country. And I don't know how people are operating back there, but that's just part of the chaos and confusion that's being injected into the federal government.
So, Congressman, because they've said very openly, the Trump administration, that this is part of their goal to flood the zone. They, every day stuff is coming at people very quickly. What do you see as the most important things that Americans in general, and particularly African Americans, need to focus on? What's most important about what is happening right now?
Well, when you say flood the zone, you're absolutely right. They're coming up with all kinds of bizarre executive orders, many of which the courts have stopped because they're illegal. But I think if you're talking about an African American perspective, basic enforcement of civil rights, I think, are in jeopardy. When they come out proudly against diversity, equity, and inclusion, you've got to listen very carefully as to what they're talking about. Diversity has been considered a good thing for the last probably about 40 or 50 years. I mean, the whole civil rights legislation in the 60s was based on the idea that everyone ought to have access to public accommodations and employment and everything.
And it's not, it doesn't mean diversity. A lot of times people take it to mean black. But that's not what diversity means. Diversity means being diverse across the board, all races, genders, etc., right?
Well, it also questions, if you don't think much of diversity, what do you think much of? I mean, we have to put this in the context that during his last administration, President Trump appointed dozens of judges who would not say during their confirmation hearings whether or not Brown v. Board of Education was properly decided in 1954, as if segregated schools is something we need to be debating. It's not settled, over and done with. We can't have segregated schools. And so if you're not for diversity, it just opens the question, what are they for? And they come out against equity. There's a saying that if you're used to privilege, equality seems like oppression. And so they're coming out against equity. And inclusion, I mean, if you're not for inclusion, what is your position on discriminatory exclusion? I mean, you just get the sense that these people want to turn the clock back to probably before 1954. Now, you got to remember what the campaign slogan is: "Make America Great Again." I've been surprised that the media hasn't insisted that you put a number on what "again" means. They wanted to roll the clock back before the 1970s when Roe versus Wade was decided. You want to know, you look at their attitude towards the Voting Rights Act, they want to roll the clock back before that. They're against diversity. So that takes you out of Civil Rights Acts. You're back to segregated schools. You're back before 1954. I mean, what exactly do they mean by great again? And if you're talking about a time when racial segregation was the law of the land, then I think whether or not they're going to have any enforcement of civil rights is an open question. And the Department of Education, we expect maybe this afternoon, maybe tomorrow, an executive order ending the Department of Education. You got to remember what the Department of Education is there for. One of the primary focuses of the Department of Education was federal enforcement of civil rights. It was after the department came about during the Carter administration in the 70s, but schools hadn't even integrated fully. They were just beginning to be integrated by then. So the civil rights enforcement was a major function of the federal government, plus a focus on people that were generally left out in the normal public school education, like those with low income, those with disabilities, those with English as a second language. They looked at achievement gap to determine whether or not everyone was being educated or just some were being educated. I mean, that's what the Department of Education was there for.
So the Department of Education,
they want to get rid of it.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the Department of Education, it will take an act of Congress in order to dissolve that department, correct? And
yeah, technically, but if you look at it, you also need an act of Congress to get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But if you fire everybody, like this administration has done, and the courts work slowly, but I think they're slowly telling the administration that your constitutional responsibility to faithfully execute the laws do not allow you to essentially dissolve an agency by firing everybody. So they will. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to try. We would have anticipated that they would follow the law, but that's, if you look at some of these other executive orders, they don't wait to follow the law. They just do stuff, and then the courts slowly but surely tell them you can't do that. You have to undo it. So you have a total mess. But in terms of the Department of Education, I'm not sure exactly what their plans are, and that's part of the problem with even figuring out how to respond, because some of the discussion about the Department of Education has been to take all of the functions of the Department of Education and have it go somewhere else. Like, student loans would be in Department of Treasury. IDEA, enforce your rights under Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, would be under the Department of Justice. Head Start is already in HHS. School lunches are already under the Department of Agriculture. So, if you just parse things out, you'd probably have the same functions just being done by people that probably don't know what they're doing, but the same functions. So we don't know exactly what they intend to do, and until there's some clarity, it's hard to respond. But we do know that they have they've shown little interest in enforcing basic civil rights. And we have in public schools, they want to pretty much dismantle or sabotage public schools by having everybody have
vouchers.
Go to vouchers and go to private schools. all the studies I've seen have shown that when you have a voucher program, schools tend to be more segregated than they were, and so you're not surprised that they're in favor of that.
So, Congressman,
but you ought to be talking about improving the public schools.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, when they talk about vouchers, they say, well, everybody ought to have a choice. Fact is, 90% of the people are going to end up in public schools anyway, and if you've given 10% a choice, they may or may not have been able to find somewhere to go that's better than the public school, but 90% of the people are stuck in the public schools that are as bad or worse than they were before you started the voucher program.
You, speaking of civil rights, there's discussion about President Trump pardoning Derek Chauvin. If that happens, what do you think will happen in this country? Derek Chauvin, for those who may not recall, was a police officer who murdered George Floyd, was convicted federally and in the state. So I believe even if he got a federal pardon, he would still have to serve the state time. But in terms of the message that is sending.
Well, it's no different message than the pardon of the January 6th defendants who were convicted, many of assaulting police officers, and part of an effort to overthrow the government. Obviously, there's a message there. Thankfully, Chauvin was convicted on state as well as federal charges, so the pardon would not affect the state charges. But I hadn't heard that, but it doesn't come as a surprise. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking with Congressman Bobby Scott. What questions do you have? We will take questions, but we will take civil conversation. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Raphael joins us from Newport News. Hi, Raphael. You're on the air.
Good day, everybody. Thank you for receiving my call. And thank you, Mr. Scott, for being a great representative.
Raphael, are you moving? Are you walking around?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we need you to stand still because we can't hear you.
Okay. I want to thank you for receiving my call. And thank you. Thank Mr. Scott for being a good representative for our district. My question is this. I mean, to ponder, a thinking person might say, well, in order to become a federal employee, no run-of-the-mill person is qualified for that job. So you must have the most skilled, the most qualified for that job. And to say, well, the factor of race and gender and stuff with this factor and all that, do I understand the law that the idea of gender, race, whatever, will not be taken into effect, or will not taken as a thought in order to hire this person. So it's like, it's kind of a confusing situation where in order to be hired, they had to negate the idea of, or not put as a factor race and gender, whatever, but they're saying at the end, because you have a certain race and gender, that is the reason why they're hired.
Okay.
That's confusing.
Okay. I think I got your gist. I'll see if I can make sure the congressman understands what you're saying. If I'm not mistaken, you're saying that in order to get a civil service job, you have to have the skill. You have to be qualified for that job from the beginning. And then the issue of race and gender and other qualifications play secondary. I think is what you're saying. When you're moving around, so it's really hard for us to hear you. Does that sound correct?
That's precisely correct.
Okay. Okay. Let me let the congressman give an answer to that. Did you hear me, Congressman Scott?
I did, but he's absolutely right. Diversity does not allow people to fill positions for which they're not qualified. And you saw this hypocrisy in the firing of C.Q. Brown, who was chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. By the way, General Brown graduated from Ferguson High School in Newport News. He was he's a four-star Air Force general. The incoming Secretary of Defense was on a podcast prior to becoming Secretary of Defense where he questioned General Brown's qualifications because he's black. If the Secretary knew anything about the military, he would know that the general became a four-star general not because he's black, but in spite of the fact that he's black. But he questioned his qualifications, and I Googled most unqualified nominee. I just Googled that. And the FBI guy and XF, the Secretary of Defense, their names popped up. So most unqualified nominee is going to question somebody's qualifications. And then he turned around and replaced General Brown with a three-star general, a person by rank less qualified, but white. Well, the lack of appreciation for actual qualifications is obvious. And so when he says to get a federal job you have to be qualified, of course you've got to be qualified. And for this administration to question people's qualifications just because they happen to be African American is just an outrage. These people are qualified; they're doing a good job. They wouldn't have gotten the job, as the questioner just implied, without going through the testing and the qualifications. And firing C.Q. Brown based on anything other, questioning his qualifications when he was more qualified than the one who replaced him, just reveals how empty these allegations are about so-called DEI.
Yeah.
The fact is, diversity, as you said, if you have a racially segregated workforce and think, if I've got a sales force, I'd like to have people who represent the community they're trying to make sales in, this bunch will sanction you if you try to do anything affirmative to try to broaden the diversity of your employment base. They'll sanction and they'll say so. I mean, it's a tough atmosphere. We haven't seen it since the 1960s.
Wow. If you're just joining us, we're talking about Trump administration actions and impacts with Congressman Bobby Scott, who represents Virginia's 3rd Congressional District, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Congressman, are you getting calls from seniors worried about losing their Social Security and their Medicare?
Yes. I mean, and they should be, because the budget that was produced includes massive tax cuts, heavily tilted to the top 1% in corporations, and they need to pay for them. And if you look at the proposed budget, they're going after health care, particularly Medicaid. They're going after access to college and other educational programs. And they're going after nutrition programs like SNAP benefits. And they still don't pay for all the tax cuts, so they'll end up with a budget with a deficit worse than what they started. The budgeting on the part of the Republicans is all talk and no action. As a matter of fact, with all the speeches these guys have been making over the years, most people are surprised to hear that every Republican president since Nixon has left for their Democratic successors a worse deficit than they inherited from the Democrats, everyone without exception. And every Democrat since Kennedy has left for the Republican successors a better deficit situation than they inherited. That includes, of course, Clinton, who had such a surplus that they had left the budget alone, we'd have paid off the entire debt held by the public by 2008. But the Republicans come in and mess up the budget. They talk a good game. And like I said, in the middle of the speech, the president said he supports a balanced budget. And they all jump up and cheer. And then you look at the budget that they just passed, and it includes an increase in the deficit, just like clockwork. The deficit is worse than they inherited from Joe Biden. You can't make this stuff up.
I hear the frustration in your voice. I mean, and I would imagine that frustration is there across the board. What are you saying to your Republican colleagues? What are your Republican colleagues saying to you?
Well, the Republicans said that the annual deficit and the building debt are absolutely reprehensible. It is an outrage that we're leaving that to the next generation, and we ought to be ashamed of ourselves. And that's why they're voting for the budget. Then you look at the numbers, and the budget is worse than if they'd just gone home and done nothing. I mean, they apparently do not understand arithmetic, and they just talk a good game. But when you get down to the basics, the budget is always worse, at least since the 1960s, has been worse when Republican presidents are there, and better when Democratic presidents are there.
Well, speaking of budgets, we got a question from Facebook. Lynn from Chesapeake wants to know that she says that she's heard friends say that tariffs that this administration is imposing will generate trillions of dollars for the U.S. economy. Would that generate, if that were true, would that generate enough revenue to put a dent in the national debt?
No, well, that's not. No. Tariff is a tax that consumers pay. You know, if you order goods subject to a tariff, they will when it crosses the border, they'll add the tariff to it, and you just pay a little extra. Mm-hmm. Government doesn't get the money; you just pay it out of your pocket.
So it's going to affect the citizens as opposed to the government getting more money in, being a stream of revenue for the country.
Well, you know, if you consider money coming in, the tariff, consumers paying more, you know, it's just that extra tax. But the amount of money they're talking about it does not amount to very much at all in terms of the trillions of dollars in deficit. All it does is increase inflation. I mean, you know, they talk a good game, they whine, but if you listen very carefully on the question of inflation, over the last 3 years, Republicans have whined about inflation, and if you look at the polls, people who vote on the issue of inflation vote for Republicans. But if you look very closely, all they're doing is complaining about it and blaming the Democrats. If you look at their policy, they're making it worse. Tariffs have caused upward pressure on prices. Immigration policies where the cost of food is going to go up if there's nobody out there to pick the crops. So that's going to have an upward pressure on prices. Everything they do will have an upward pressure on prices. All the policy they have, the only policy they have is complain about it and blame the Democrats. And you heard it. You listen to the press secretary, what are you doing about prices? First thing out of their mouth, oh, Joe Biden. Blame him. Don't blame us. And that's been their position through all of this. The Democratic position, by the way, on inflation was to pass the American Rescue Plan Act. You had global inflation. Of course, you can have inflation in the United States. We put money in people's pockets so they could pay the slightly inflated prices. A family of four, during the first 2 years of the Biden administration, got over $5,000 in stimulus checks, over $6,000 in child tax credits, thousands more in enhanced SNAP benefits. If you lost your job, you got more sitting on the sofa than you were working. For a lot of people. We reduced your health care premiums for the Affordable Care Act. You know, the average working family had at least 10, with a family of four, got at least 10, maybe as much as 20,000 or more to pay the little inflated prices. I mean, inflated prices were bad, but, you had more money coming in to deal with it than you had going out. The Republican program was to complain about it.
Yeah.
They didn't support everything I mentioned. The stimulus checks, the child tax credit, the enhanced SNAP benefits, the reduced health care costs, enhanced unemployment compensation, all of that. They voted against everyone right down the line. So that instead of having $10,000 to $20,000 extra in your checking account, you wouldn't have had any, but you would have had somebody whining and complaining about inflation.
So the President Trump's making all these moves through executive order. So my question is, can Congress or the courts override executive orders? And what do you say to those?
That's no question about it. Congress can override an executive order by passing a statute. Of course, the president would have to sign it, subject to maybe a veto override. But Congress does have the power to respond to an executive order if they want to. The problem is that a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate, better known as Republicans, don't want to do anything.
But my question,
they have shown no interest in doing anything to rein in Elon Musk or Elon Musk or Donald Trump and all this chaos and confusion. They've shown no interest in doing anything but sitting on their hands.
So, Congressman, in the Senate, the majorities are not that big, but in the Senate especially, are there not enough Republicans that would work with Democrats to try to stop some of the things that seem to be harming Americans so much, especially like the job firings as an example, or Medicare and Social Security, another example. I mean, there are many examples, but is there not enough push and pull and trying to work together so that something can be done?
If we could get 3 Republicans to join us in the House, they will not be able to cut Medicaid.
Wow. And so are those conversations happening?
We're trying. They're hard to find, but we'll see. And I know there's one Republican going around the Republican conference explaining to people where he didn't want to vote for the budget because 60% of his constituents were on Medicaid. 60%. Then he went ahead and voted for the budget framework anyway, which it doesn't require a cut in Medicaid, but one report I saw showed that by insisting that the Committee on Energy and Commerce find almost $900 billion in cuts. If you don't touch Medicaid, they might be able to get up to about $100 billion, and that's it. They've got to go into Medicaid, and he voted for the budget anyway. So the interesting vote will be when they try to put the new budget into effect. Now, next week we have the funding for the rest of the year with the budget as it is. Now, I don't know what's going to happen on that vote, but I don't expect it to consider any of the tax cuts or anything else dramatic, just more of a continuation of what we've got. And if we can get that to the end of the year, that will be the base. And then you go into what they call reconciliation, putting this new budget they passed into effect. And that's where you get the tax cuts, and that's where you get the cuts in Medicaid, access to college, nutrition benefits, including SNAP benefits. That's when the damage will occur. But it'll be interesting to see on that vote what they do. But if we had 3 Republicans to just say they were not going to vote for Medicaid cuts, you could take that off the table.
So what about the Virginia delegation? I mean, we've got Democrats and Republicans.
I'm not going to talk about my colleagues in Virginia. We try to get along.
Okay.
But as I said, we need 3 Republicans.
Got you. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Erica joins us from Hampton. Hi, Erica. You're on the air.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Representative Scott, thank you so much for taking your time out. We understand how much stress you must be under working under these circumstances. But my question actually echoes what you've been talking about for the last few minutes, and that is the Democratic response to what is happening in Congress. A few weeks ago, there was a Democratic congressperson who went to the Department of Education, and they were not permitted to enter the building by one individual. And it made me think about John Lewis and those who came up. And I know you were part of, that great rising of Black men and women who stood strong in the political arena on behalf of Black people all over the nation. But they were willing to go to the nth degree to do it. They were willing to go to jail. They were willing to catch a case, understanding that there were legal persons on staff to help them to facilitate whatever happened. And it feels like as a collective, and absolutely no disrespect because I honor what you do and what you've done over the years, but there feels like a very docile point of view and a lack of aggression when it comes to really making change. And I don't know all the ins and outs. I don't speak as an expert, only as a novice, as a woman in Generation X who has seen these things, come and go, and now watching my daughter's rights and my granddaughter's rights now be dialed back is putting me in a real weird space. And what I guess my question is what truly are Democrats willing to do other than just wait for another election cycle to begin to turn the tide? And I know this is probably very early, but 47 has come in like an absolute, Category 5 hurricane. So we're on our heels but we knew what he was going to do. So what is the Democratic Party really going to do? To what degree did the Democratic Party think they need to do in order to really see some of these things change, stopped, put some fear in the hearts of those who are emboldened to do whatever they feel they can do at this time? What is that real plan? Or should we just be concerned about what we can change, and that is our neighborhoods, our cities that we live in, and not even care what's happening on a federal level?
Okay, Erica, thank you so very much for that question. Congressman.
Well, when you talked about people that went to jail and all that stuff in the past, those were not legislators. Legislators try to legislate, and we're doing everything we can as legislators. If you don't want me to be in jail when they're taking votes, you want me to be on the floor voting. And so, if you want people to go to jail, you can't vote on the floor of the House. You can go to jail. So, if people think going to jail is a good idea, they ought not be pointing the finger. But the fact is that you had a different atmosphere back then too. People went to when John Lewis got beat on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and Martin Luther King went to jail. Legislators were so embarrassed that they passed the Voting Rights Act. Well, I'm not sure that these guys would have the same reaction. We have to, one, use every tool we've got, and one is if people want to be helpful, they can check out who is filing these lawsuits and support those groups. You've got like Democracy Forward, CREW, the Citizens for Responsible Ethics in Washington. You've got the ACLU, NAACP, Legal Defense Fund. Most of these groups, if they file one or two lawsuits, that's about all they can afford. They have filed 100 lawsuits already. And supporting those organizations would be very important. Making sure people are registered to vote. The demonstrations that are helpful are those that let Republicans know that their next election may be in jeopardy. Democrats having temper tantrums will not change any votes. We need to make sure that they know that Republicans who voted for them did not think that they were going to have their Medicaid and their SNAP benefits and their federal jobs taken away from them. But in terms of what we're doing everything we possibly can as legislators to try to slow this thing up. Part of the problem is that the president has been so far out of bounds in terms of the law. I mean, of these 100 lawsuits, we're winning most of them. We were ready, for example, for the CF, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
We were ready to protect the rules that the Biden administration had put in place because there were some very beneficial rules, and we suspected that they were going to try to change them around. We were ready to protect the rules. We didn't expect them to illegally disband the entire agency. And the defense against that would be to have somebody come into Congress and testify what is going on. Regrettably, we can't get the Republicans not only not to do anything, but not even to join in the questions. I've asked questions about what Elon Musk is doing in the computer systems, what information he has access to, and what he's doing with it. I haven't gotten any answers, and I can't get the majority on my committee to join in asking the questions. It's very difficult, but at some point we're doing everything we can with the votes we have. Like I said, in the whole country, if people want to be helpful, talk to people in Republican districts and get us three Republicans to join the Democrats, and we can put an end to any discussion about cutting Medicaid, cutting education benefits, cutting nutrition benefits. We can put an end to that discussion.
So my question to you then is, what do you say then? Because there are citizens out there who are very happy with what's going on right now, and they think that this is a good thing and that we're going in the right direction. I'm wondering what your message would be to them.
There's a ongoing joke about people who voted for the leopard's face-eating party. And when the leopard's face-eating party.
Uh-huh.
And then when they show up at the emergency room after the leopard ate their face, they say, "I didn't think he was going to eat my face." Well, a lot of these people voted, and then all of a sudden, it's their program that gets cut. They say, "Well, I didn't think they were going to cut my program." Well, I didn't think they'd take my Medicaid. I didn't think they were going to take my nutrition benefits. I didn't think they were going to take make my student loan more expensive, or cut my Pell Grant, or otherwise access to college. I didn't think they were going to cut my child's access to a good public education. I think when they start looking and saying, "Now, if you vote for a party that's cutting all this stuff, sooner or later they're going to cut your stuff too." And I think you're seeing some of this right now in terms of people. Medicaid. People think that's low-income minority children.
Right.
No. A lot of Medicaid goes to nursing homes. And the average middle-class family cannot afford nursing home care, or if they can afford it the first couple of months, after about a year or so, they're broke, they spent down, and they qualify for Medicaid. A lot of people, if these cuts go through, a lot of people will no longer be able to afford nursing home, and I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, they'll just be bankrupt.
So do you think that this ultimately may bring the country together as everyone is affected by these moves?
Well, sometimes it's just hard to tell. But some of these, I mean, you just wonder, how can anybody cut Medicaid and SNAP benefits and access to college in order to fund tax cuts for the super wealthy? I mean, top 1%. You're talking about people who make about $700,000 a year or more. Give them a good tax break and have people pay for it with cuts in essential services. You just wonder who's for that. Well, the Republicans. That's what the Republicans voted for, and they're going to fill in the blanks in a couple of weeks. If we have 3 Republicans to join the Democrats, that plan will not go forward.
So we only have about 3 minutes left. What message then do you have for everyone who is anxious and worried about the direction that we're going right now?
Well, I think if they should be anxious because they are if they're paying attention. I mean, their health care is up in jeopardy. It's not just Medicaid; it's Affordable Care Act, which it means that everybody has affordable access to affordable health care. That's in jeopardy. And like I said, the civil service is not a jobs program; it's a service program. The people who have those jobs are providing services. Try to get a passport after they fire everybody in the passport office. Try to get any kind of benefits. Try to get a straight answer out of the Internal Revenue. The reason we put money into the Internal Revenue 2 or 3 years ago was to make sure that when you call the IRS, somebody would answer the phone. You just want a straight answer to simple questions. If you want government to work, you can't let this budget go through. And I think as people pay attention, they'll notice that everybody has an interest in government working for them. And if they don't pay attention, all of this chaos and confusion. I mean, they fired people at the agency that was protecting nuclear weapons, and all of a sudden they say, "Whoops!" Then they're going to trying to get them back. I'm not sure they ever got them back. We can't get a straight answer what the status of that is. But they're making a mess out of things, and soon they're going to find out that the mess is going to be closer to home than they wanted.
Well, Congressman, I think you guys got your hands full. And I know that people are watching and wondering what is going to happen next. So we need to pay attention is the bottom line, correct?
Sounds good to me. But I think the next we have a budget coming up on next week. We want to make sure there's no mischief in that. That's just a continuation of the budget for the rest of the year.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll be able to do it on a full funding basis, not what they call a continuing resolution, which has problems in it.
Yeah.
But then their reconciliation of their budget framework that they passed.
Okay, we'll be watching. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us, Congressman. We really, really appreciate it. And audience, thank you for your thoughtful questions, civil conversation, and attention to what is happening in our country right now. Please share this show with your friends and family. Go to whro.org/anotherview and download the podcast. And you can find all of our Another View shows on this site also. Next week on Another View, the Another View Roundtable, hosted by producer Lisa Godley. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer. And Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Hey, look, you guys, it's really germy out there. Mask up, stay safe, and join us again next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.